Hey, so we started a new series last week called Clean. And the concept is about us wanting to explore over the next several weeks what is involved in our personal walk of pursuing holiness with God. And we said there's essentially two key parts to this. The first is this, is that although we come to the Lord and we experience right off the bat instantaneous legal standing before God of innocence, that we're covered in Jesus' blood and his atonement and we're brought before God as sinless and spotless, the scriptures still call us to actively participate in our own pursuit of holiness. We said, Paul writes it this way in 2 Corinthians 7, this is from last week. Paul says, therefore, since we have these promises, key in on that. Paul says, since we have these promises, on the basis of the promises of being brought before God sinless, of being brought before God spotless, of the fact that we have a new name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, because we have the promise of eternity with God, on the basis of all those promises, we're not supposed to just sit back and go, well, great, Jesus did it all. Paul actually calls us to response. He says, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us cleanse ourselves from everything that could defile the body and the spirit and thus accomplish holiness out of reverence for God. So we're called to an active lifestyle of personally seeking out our own ongoing, constant cleansing for as long as we would be this side of heaven. But the second part of this series is that we looked at Jesus' words in Matthew 15, and one of the things we noted was that Jesus said that the majority of this cleansing that we're supposed to do, this cleansing process, really deals more with what's broken inside of us as opposed to us abstaining from anything on the outside. He said this to the audience that he was talking to in Matthew 15. He says, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them. Rather, it is what comes out of their mouth. And we explored all of this last week, and if you haven't seen part one of the series, go back because you're going to need that foundation as we go through the rest of this, throughout the rest of this month. But Jesus' point is that as we walk this life, that so many people think that the Christian life is that we're just supposed to abstain from all of this stuff in the world. And Jesus says there's all kinds of stuff. Yes, there's stuff we're supposed to abstain from, but the issue isn't really that those things exist. The issue is that the reason that we crave those things, the reason that we have perverted associations with cravings outside of us is really because of what's broken inside. It's what's coming out. It's what's internal that ultimately has to get fixed and get repaired. And so this morning, we want to go into part two and look at a very specific area of cleansing, which specifically we want to deal with. What do we do with those cravings outside of us, external in the world, those things that we crave, that ultimately would expose what's broken internal? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever stood with the refrigerator door open, staring into it, and you're not even hungry? Anybody? Anybody do that when it's not even been 60 minutes since you last ate? You'll just stand there. We just go and we open the door and we look inside and we just kind of hoping something magically is going to appear. And we're not even hungry. We're just thinking that maybe we might see something that might make us hungry. And nothing's there, so you close the door. And 30 minutes later, you come back as if something magically was put inside while you were gone. And we'll open it and look again and go, maybe I didn't see it the last. We do that. We'll just stand in front of the refrigerator. Let's get a little bit more serious. Have you ever experienced jealousy, anger? You name the emotion. Have you ever experienced any kind of adverse reaction to anything you've seen on Facebook? Anybody? No, that one's just me. That's what happens when Lane preaches. He's the only one that experiences these things. Maybe you posted something yourself and then you get no responses. You think, does no one like me? And we deal with these things. We deal with cravings externally of hunger. We deal with cravings of popularity or friendship. Or let's get even a little bit more serious. Maybe you've gone to work one day, and I think everybody in some extent has dealt with this, whether it's work, whether it's colleague, whether it's family, whatever the case is. And somebody says something critical. It's small. Maybe it was even a joke. It's just a jab, just a little bit dig at you. Something that they said. And it was said within the span of 2 seconds, but then you obsessed over it all day long. Anybody? Why'd they say that? Well, do they really think that of me? Was there something deeper behind that? Is that their opinion of me? And somebody says something just so, and all of a sudden it controls the entirety of our day. All of us, listen to me. Every single person in this room deals with these kinds of issues. All of us deal with the notion of external issues, cravings issues, whether we're looking for food, whether we're looking for popularity, whether we're looking for friendship, whether we're looking for status or prestige or whatever. All of us deal with external issues that ultimately drive internal brokenness inside of us that we have to deal with. And the scriptures speak to this. Notice what John writes in his epistle, not the gospel and not Revelation, but in one of his letters in 1 John 2. John writes about this reality. He says, don't love the world or the things that it offers you. The world offers cravings for physical pleasure, cravings for things that we see, pride in our achievements and our possessions, all of those external cravings that we deal with. But then we want to pair James's writings with John to give us the deeper issues that Jesus was ultimately pointed to, because James writes this in chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. He says, what's causing quarrels and issues among you? Doesn't it come from the evil desires that war within you? Again, there's that concept that it's internal. It's not external. You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have. But you can't get it, so you fight and you wage war to take it from them. And you don't have because you don't ultimately ask God for what it is you're desiring. And then even when you do ask, James says, you still don't have it because you're not really asking in the purposes of God's will. You're just asking because you want to consume it on your own cravings, your own pleasure. In other words, we live in a world that is kind of like one of those restaurants where you finish your dinner and they bring the dessert tray. Right? Ever been there? You're completely full, you've had dinner, you're sitting with friends, you're like, I can't eat another bite. And then they bring the dessert tray. Because they know what they're doing, right? They understand that visual appeal is better than telling you. Because they understand you just ate appetizers and a salad and food, so they show it to you. And it's always the same stuff, isn't it? It's the molten lava cake, and then it's the cheesecake, and then it's the creme brulee is always on there, isn't it? Anybody feeling hungry? Anybody want to check the refrigerator? And they put the dessert tray, and you think to yourself, well, maybe I could make some room for it. We always say, make room, as if we're like shoving it to the side and, The scriptures tell us that the world does the exact same thing. The world presents to us all of these cravings. It appeals to our physical appetites, like food, like sex, like affection. It appeals to our emotional, our psychological appetites, like status, power, acknowledgement, importance, all the things that we crave and desire outside of us, the world presents it. And here's what James says. James says that all it takes to prove that you and I have brokenness inside is for those appetites to be denied. All it takes is for those appetites to be denied, that we suddenly realize we're broken because we crave those things and we want those things and we desire those things. So how do we cleanse ourselves if it's internal? If the issue is inside, because if it was external, easy. We just abstain from that stuff. And that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people assume that the Christian walk is just steeling themselves up and exercising willpower. I'm just going to not deal with that kind of stuff. But if it's not external, if it's internal, how do we ultimately cleanse ourselves? And I want to submit to you that the scriptures gives us a pretty powerful answer, and it's found in an Old Testament narrative in 2 Kings chapter 5. Quick, just background. You've heard this story before because we've preached on it multiple times. Israel goes through its history where Israel is in rebellion before God, and so God decides that the way in which he's going to discipline Israel is he will allow external empires to come in and conquer her for a period of time. Babylon, Syria, the outside empires come in. And as we read in 2 Kings 5, that has all transpired. Israel is in a period where they are dominated by outside forces and outside empires. One of those empires is Syria. The reason I give you the history lesson is that the author in 2 Kings 5 is going to talk about a Syrian general, not an Israelite general, not a Hebrew general, a Syrian general by the name of Naaman. And the story opens this way in 2 Kings chapter 5. It says, now Naaman, the commander of the king of Syria's army, was esteemed and respected by his master. His master is the king of Syria. For through him the Lord had given Syria military victories. He was a great warrior. It's intentional, catch this. It is intentional how the author sets this guy up at the beginning. Notice it. He was the commander not of a portion of the army, but of the entirety of Syria's army. In other words, he had position. It says that he had the full respect and admiration of the king. The full respect. He was esteemed in front of the king. In other words, he had prestige. And then it says clearly, he was a great warrior. He had status. The author, in one verse, intentionally sets the story up. This guy had position. This guy had prestige. This guy had power. But he also had something else. He had a skin disease. Some of your translations probably say that he had leprosy. He had a problem external to him that he could not solve. He could conquer armies. He could conquer nations. He could do just about anything, but he couldn't cure his own illness. Catch the irony of that. A great warrior who has all that power, but that power can do nothing for him. And in one verse, the story is set up where what we're going to see in this narrative is a pattern for how God ultimately tries to get to us to deal with the internal brokenness inside of us, where we will come to him and offer ourselves for cleansing for something that is internal, not something that is external. We're going to learn 3 key parts on what it means, the pathway for cleansing ourselves when it comes to external cravings that we deal with. 3 key things. Here's the first one. Don't despise the messenger. Our famous phrase in our culture is don't shoot the messenger, but I just decided to make it a little bit more generic. Don't despise the messenger. Here's how the story continues in 2 Kings 5. It says, raiding parties went out from Syria and took captive from the land of Israel a young girl who became a servant to Naaman's wife. And so she told Naaman's wife, she said, look, if only my master were in the presence of the prophet who's in Samaria. She's referencing Elisha. She's saying, if only he knew Elisha, if only he could go to him, Elisha would cure his skin disease. And Naaman heard this. His wife told him, and so he went and told the king what the girl had said. Check how this comes to him. Again, don't forget how the author set the story up from the beginning. Who is Naaman? This guy is powerful. He is the commander of an army. He's respected by the king. He is a great warrior. Who is the girl? She's nobody. She's a captive from Israel, which according to Syria is despised. They've completely conquered them. She's a young girl. She is not even associated to the king's court. She is just a servant to his wife. The scriptures don't even give us her name. There is this notion that she is intentionally in the story, this obscure, relegated element that is completely opposite to him. He is powerful, he is strong, he is everything. She is just a servant girl from the captive land. But she is the one who has the answer. Get that. God has her as the messenger to respond ultimately to him. Think of the irony of that. I mean, this is not how military commanders get their intelligence. They don't go to the young teenage servant girl of their wife to get the intelligence. They get it from their military commanders, or the king will summon them to the court. The story intentionally puts forward this ironic notion that the answer for what he is dealing with ultimately comes through a channel that he would not have chosen himself. God does that with us too, if you didn't know. The way in which God tries to get a hold of us, the way that God brings answers to us is not always the way that we would ultimately desire. He comes through channels, he brings messengers to us that sometimes are not the most likely of messengers. God may choose to speak to you through a coworker at work that you're not especially fond of. And yet they have the answer that God wants to speak to you. It could be through a neighbor that you often ignore. It could be through a family member who doesn't even go to church, and you think, they don't even know God. How's God going to come through them? How's God going to speak? But God can use any channel, person that he wants ultimately to deliver a message to you. Don't despise the messenger and how God would deliver it to you. When I was wrestling about whether or not I wanted to leave the corporate world to go back into the ministry and to go back into pastoring, I was just tied in knots. I'm somebody who, once I make a decision, I land on that decision and I will hold that decision for life. But before that decision is made, I tie myself in knots, considering all the options and the doorways and the pathways, you name it. As a teenager, I used to read those Choose Your Own Adventure books growing up. Anybody? Am I just showing my age here? Those books were torturous nightmare for me because they had so many options, and I wanted to know all the options. I would literally bookmark the pages where it would say, if you want to do this, go to this page, and I would bookmark them so I could map my pathway. I didn't want to miss what the right pathway was, and I do the same thing in my spiritual walk. And I was just and I was calling friends of mine in California, pastoring, who went to grad school with, and I was like, what do you think I should do? And they're like, I haven't talked to you in 20 years. How do I know what God's saying to you? Everybody praying, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then one day I'm in my office here. I was working part-time for the church, and I was still full-time in the corporate world, but I was putting in some hours here during the day, so I had an office space back here, and I'm back here by myself. And this lady shows up at my door. I have no idea who she is. Not a clue. Didn't know her name, didn't know her. She said, I'm part of the prayer group here on Tuesdays. And I was like, okay, great. No clue. She said, I feel like God has given me something for you. Now, you got to understand, I grew up in the charismatic world, so I classify myself as a conservative charismatic. What that means is I fully believe in all the things of the Spirit completely, but having grown up in the charismatic world, I've seen the crazy as much as I've seen the real. Anybody else with me on that one? I have had people come to me and say, the Lord said you're going to China. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I've had those kinds of experiences. So she said, I have a word. I didn't dismiss it. I wasn't negative. I just said, oh. She said, 2 minutes of your time. And I said, sure, sit down. And she said, I just feel like God gave this for me to say it to you, and I just want to say it. She said, you think you're waiting on the Lord. He wants you to know he's waiting on you. The move is yours. She said, I don't know what that means. I'm out. And she left. Less than 2 minutes. She drops a spiritual grenade on my desk, lets it explode in front of me, and she leaves. And I'm like a kid in high school that was just told that a girl liked him, because I'm like chasing out the door going, well, did he say anything else? Did he say he's going to provide for me financially? Did he talk about the mortgage? Did he say what he's going to do with my wife? Or are we going to get health care? Did he say anything? She's gone. But I knew as clear as day that it was the Lord. She had no idea what the message meant. She did not know I was wrestling with this decision. She did not even know that I was considering the full-time option. None of that was available to her. All she knew was that God had told her to come and deliver the message. I didn't know who, not a clue. The message didn't come through my pastoral friends, didn't come through the counsel or wisdom of others or people that I esteem or respect. It came through somebody I had no clue, but I knew it was the Lord. Do not despise how God might choose to bring a message to you about something that is broken or needing fixed inside of you. Do not despise the messenger. For Naaman, it was this young girl. For you, who knows? Here's the second thing. Don't dictate the means. Don't dictate the means. The story continues in verse 5. It says, the king of Syria said, go. Naaman had gone to the king and said, look, I've got this issue. I've got this skin disease. You already know about it. This girl claims that there's a prophet in the land of Samaria that if I go see, he can heal it. And so the king says to Naaman, well, then go. I will give you a letter that will give you passage into their land, because Syria was in the ruling authority at this point in time. He says, I will give you passage. More than that, Naaman, I will give you as much of the treasury as you want. And it says that Naaman went and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 suits of clothes. And he goes to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel says, dude, I can't heal you. It's great that you have all this money and this stuff that you want to give me, but I can't do it. And so Naaman realizes that's the wrong channel, and so he actually goes to the house of Elisha, and he goes, I will go meet with this prophet face to face. And in verse 9 it says, so Naaman came with his horses and chariots, and he stood in the doorway of Elisha's house. He's thinking, I'll have a sit down with this man of this powerful Yahweh. I will meet him face to face. But Elisha doesn't come to talk to him. Elisha sends out a messenger. A messenger. I don't know why I see the messenger as an 11-year-old boy. I just do. And the reason I say that is that every time I've read this verse, I see this young kid come to the doorway and say to him, go and wash 7 times in the Jordan. He's like going through puberty or something like that. I only imagine that because it says that Naaman gets so angry that this kid comes to the door. Just the messenger comes to the door, somebody of no status, that Elisha won't even dignify this military general with a face-to-face meeting. He has to send this young errand boy out. And Naaman's like, what is this? That's the answer? I got to listen to it. And the kid says, well, my master said this. He said, go wash in the Jordan. In the Jordan? The Jordan is a muddy, disgusting river. It is not a flowing, crystal clear stream over rocks like you would see in the Appalachians or in the Rockies. The Jordan is a lot like the kinds of estuaries that we have here in our region, flowing off of the Chesapeake Bay. Mud, silt, oysters, gooey muck that when you step into it, the ooze, you know what I'm talking about? It's disgusting. And here's the thing, get this. If you have a skin disease with open lesions and sores, the last option medically you're probably going to get is go into a muddy river where animals defecate and people bathe. Because that is recipe for infection, not cleansing. But that's the instruction. But here's the issue. Here's what I want you to see in this. Naaman's problem is not that it's muddy. Naaman's problem is not that it's disgusting. No, Naaman's problem is that it's not happening the way he wants it to happen. It's right in the text, as clear as day the author gives it to us. Look at Naaman's words again. He says this. He says, I can't believe this. Look at his words. He says, I thought for sure this man of God was going to come out. He was going to stand there. He was going to invoke the name of his Lord, the God, and he was going to wave his hand over the spot, and it was going to happen like that. Because that's how you heal military generals. You don't put them through the ringer. You don't send your messenger boy. You don't put them in a muddy river. You just invoke the name of that powerful God. You wave your hand magically, and it happens. He was mad at the means. He wanted it to happen one way. That's not how God was going to do it. We do the same thing. We know we're dealing with something. God's been speaking to us about something inside, broken for years. We have addictions we've been dealing with. Can be with food, can be with alcohol, can be with pornography. We can have unnatural cravings for status or power, and it begins to control us and manipulate us so that we're angry at work when someone makes a criticism of us because it tears down our image of ourselves. And we know we're dealing with these things, and we know that God's telling us that we have to bring that to him. So we go, I know what I'll do. Okay, God, I'll deal with this. So I'm going to go to church on Sunday, and if they do that altar thing where they're praying and people come and stand at the front, I'll just go to the front, and one of those altar workers is just going to put their hands on me, and boom, I'm going to be healed. Doesn't always happen that way, does it? No discredit. We believe in the power of prayer, and we believe every single Sunday when we do that God has. But sometimes God chooses other means. I know what I'll do. I'm not going to go to the front. I don't need to go to the front. What I'll do is I'll just call Pastor Mac. I'm picking on Mac today because Brian's not here, so just picking on him. I'll call Pastor Mac, and he's going to pray over me. And when he prays over me on the phone, I'm just going to feel the glow of the Palmer prayer. And it's going to be instant. I'm going to hang up the phone and go, I'm done with that issue. I've wrestled with it for 35 years. Mac cured it in 35 seconds. Doesn't always happen that way, does it? Don't dictate the means. Naaman wasn't angry because it was a muddy river or because he was scared about getting infected by the water. He was mad because it was beneath him. It wasn't how he wanted it to be done. Don't despise the messenger, how God might ultimately tell you or speak to you how he wants to deal with you. And don't dictate the means of how he's going to ultimately work through you. Whatever he tells you, do it. And the truth is that you probably already have sensed something of what God's been talking to you about, because usually these broken things inside of us are things that we've known about for years and we've wrestled with for years. There's this, and it may not even make any sense to you. I had a guy years ago that came to me and he said, he had been dealing with this one issue in his life completely. He came to me, he said, I feel like God told me to get rid of my car, to sell my car. And he said, I don't. I said, do you feel like that? I said, then sell it. Sold it, came back, and he experienced a breakthrough in his life because he had attached a certain status and image to the type of car he drove that spoke to his own ego and issue, and by getting rid of that, ultimately God began to deal with something. Don't dictate the means. He may tell you to cancel the Netflix subscription outright. He may tell you to get the TV out of your house completely. He may tell you that whoever the person is at work that's been criticizing you that you just try to stay away from, he may say, I want you to go to work and I want you to start complimenting them on a daily basis. What? I can't stand that jerk. I'm supposed to compliment them? Don't push the issue. God may actually then tell you to start taking cupcakes to them. And you go, I don't get it. You don't have to get it. Because the means has more to do with what God's trying to get at here in you than it has to do with the external issue you're dealing with. Don't despise the messenger. Don't dictate the means. And here's the last and third point. Discern the motive that the Spirit would reveal. Discern the motive. The story comes to a semi-conclusion. We're not reading the entire chapter. But in verses 13 to 14, it says this, that Naaman's all angry, and he leaves Elisha's house, and he says, I'm not doing that. I'm out. I'm done. I brought the letter from the king. That didn't work. I brought the wealth from the treasury. That didn't work. I came to see the prophet. He wouldn't even come see me. And then he brings out this messenger kid who tells me to go dip. I'm done. And it says that one of Naaman's servants came to him and said to him, Master, if I can just beg your indulgence, it's odd to me that you won't do this. He said, if the prophet had told you to do some difficult tasks, the Hebrew here can be translated as some great thing. Some of your translations, if you're following along, actually reads that way. It doesn't read difficult task, it reads some great thing. The servant says, you would have been willing to do that. It seems that you should be happy that all he's asking you to do is just go dip in the water. What have you got to lose is essentially what his servant's saying. And so Naaman goes and dips in the water and he's actually healed. What was the point of the servant saying that? It betrays something inside of Naaman. What a servant said was, I've seen you, I've watched you operate. If he had told you, go into a foreign land and conquer an army and then you'll get your healing, you would have been like, yes, I can do that. Or if he had told you to ride into a foreign enemy's territory and to bring back portions of their treasury and lay it at his feet, you would have said, I can do that. And the reason you would have done that is because it would have bolstered your ego. It would have spoken to your pride. It would have benefited you, not just in curing the disease, but it would have also given you what you love so much. But the river, that's actually hard for you. And the reason is because you have to take off all those accoutrements. You have to take off the medals, the sashes, the robes, the external image that you have built. You have to tear all of that off, and you have to step into water bare, and that's beneath you. That's humiliating to you. That's humbling to you. And in that moment, the real issue is exposed. Yes, he has a skin disease, but that's not what God's trying to get at, is it? God can cure a skin disease like that. But Naaman was suffering from a deeper infection that he didn't even realize he was dealing with, which was his own pride and arrogance and internal affection of his own image and status. The skin disease was nothing but an external issue. The deeper problem was the brokenness inside of him of his own pride, and God chose a messenger and a means to discover a motive inside of him that was broken that he wanted to get at. And that's what had to be exposed. What is it in you? What is it in you where there is an external issue, an external craving, an external appetite, but the reality is all that is exposing something deeper that's broken inside of you that God, yes, God can solve the external issue. Yes, God can break that addiction. Yes, God can break that controlling aspect over you. But the truth of the matter is that he can do that in a second. The bigger question that we want to deal with this morning is what is the internal brokenness he wants to heal? That is significantly harder, not because God's power is limited, but because we don't always bring that stuff to God so quickly, do we? A couple of weeks ago, my son contracted foot, hand, and mouth disease. Ever heard of this? What a nightmare. Foot, hand, and mouth disease. Do you know why it's called that? Because you get a disease on your feet, your hands, and your mouth. Whoever the medical community was that labeled this one, they didn't put a lot of time into it. They saw somebody that had sores on their feet and their hands and their mouth, and they went, we'll call this one COVID. This one, foot, hand, mouth. I like it. It's nasty. Fever, sore throat, and then the body, like chicken pox, breaks out in sores, and he just on his whole body broken out in sores all over. And there's no medication for it. It's viral. So we went to the doctor, and the doctor said it just has to work itself through the bloodstream. And he said, I'm just going to give you a heads up. You're going to be going through some sleepless nights. And I said, okay. And sure enough, man, Kyle just, for 2-3 nights, just no sleep because the itchiness and the pain and just the body. And we did baths and Epsom salts, and we did all that kind of stuff. And because my wife works in retail and I'm in a pastoral situation, I said, it's a lot easier for me to work from home than for you. You have to physically. I said, I got this. So night after night, rubbing his back, putting him in the bathtub, doing all the kind of stuff. 2 or 3 nights, and then finally the night came where I put his feet in a salt bath, and he fell asleep on the floor. And the first time in 3 nights, I watched him just go to sleep, and I went, we're out of this. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then it hit me. Is this contagious? Honest, I did not think of it until the end, and I Googled it and said, who gets foot? And it said, anybody can get it. It's mainly for younger kids. It is rarely seen in adults. Operative word there is rarely. Doesn't say never. Tuesday night, a couple of weeks ago, he's out of the woods. He's healing. I just start to feel funny. Cold sweats, sore throat, and my hands are itchy. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. And I thought, I'm just exhausted. I'm just going to go to bed. Wake up Wednesday morning, I'm worse. Soaked through the sheets. Hands are on fire. My feet are on fire. And I'm just thinking, and I thought, no. My wife is like, honey, you're sick. I was like, I'm not sick. I'm just exhausted. This is going to go. I'm fine. I had to teach that night. It was midweek. It was a Wednesday. And I said, she's like, you're sick. I was like, I'm fine. Just go to work. She goes to work. She calls me and she says, listen, I know you. She said, you're going to try to power through this. I had already crushed some NyQuil and some Advil that morning, done everything I could. I'm sitting at my desk at home. I got a blanket wrapped around me. She goes, you're going to try to power through this. Just surrender. Just call in sick. I can't stand calling in. Anybody else like that? It's surrender to me. It's I admit defeat. And I had this little game I play with my wife, which doesn't obligate me. And I said, I hear you. And she said, no, that's not an answer. She said, I'm asking you to tell me that you're going to call in sick. I said, I hear you. The reason I say that is because that way I can't, I don't want to obligate myself. I don't want to say yes because then I have to abide by. So I said, I hear you. She said that, just call in sick and surrender. I said, I'll talk to you later. Hour later, just sweat's pouring down. My hands are itching and on fire. And on my feet, I can see red sores appearing. So I called in. Yeah, I'm not going to make it tonight. I'll be in the office tomorrow. This is me. I'll be in the office tomorrow. No, I won't. But Wednesday night came, and they taught here, and everything went off without a hitch, and I wasn't here. I wasn't needed, and that bothers me. So Thursday comes, and I called. I was like, I'm not going to be in today, guys. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time, and tomorrow's my day off anyway, so I just want to rest up so I can be there by the weekend. Thursday, I'm terrible. Friday, I'm terrible. Saturday, I'm terrible. And I realized by Saturday, I can't even go to church on Sunday morning. So I miss Wednesday, and I have to call and say, I won't even be there Sunday morning. Now I'm missing Sunday. And church goes along. Everything happens. I'm not needed. Everything goes along. I'm not necessary, and that bothers me. And so I'm just in a funk. Ever been there? Sunday afternoon, my wife goes and grabs groceries and brings them back, and I'm sitting in the house, and I see her pull in the driveway, and I go, so I run outside, and tailgate goes up, and the bags are there in the back, and I start coming over to grab bags, and she goes, whoa, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to carry groceries. Don't you touch that stuff. I don't want that disease on me. I was like, really? I was like, I'm quarantined from you? She said, stand back by about 5 feet. I got this. I was like, I can't teach on Wednesday. I can't go to church on Sunday and help out. I can't even bring the groceries in. I'm useless. This stupid disease that's meant for kids, I got it. What's the purpose behind this? I'm completely relegated as useless, and I'm just dark cloud. Went in the garage. The double doors were up in the garage, and I went in, and there's a bench there, and I sat down on the bench, just moping, sad for myself, pity party. You guys don't have those. That's just me. And I something in my spirit, I just said to the Lord, I said, what's the point about all this, And I'll be 100% transparent. There's this thought in my mind of man, God, I just did the pastoral thing, man. I just cared for a young, sick child. And this is the reward? What's the point behind all of this? I'm just, And all of a sudden, just right here in my spirit, wasn't an audible voice, just right here. Sense the Lord say, you're not angry because work isn't getting done. You're angry because you attach your accomplishments to your self-worth. Ever been spanked by God? You attach to your self-worth your accomplishments. You're mad because you feel useless And the reason that it's irritating you, the reason for your pity party, is because it's robbing you of the self-worth. And that's what you attach yourself to rather than to me. Clear as day. Just sitting there. And suddenly, I got it. The messenger, my wife, just surrender and call in. You're sick. The means and illness that no other adult has gotten in 30 years except for me. That's the means. The motive was a chance for God to expose something that has been broken in me for long. And here's the thing, guys. It's not the first time God's spoken this to me. This is something that I have brought before the Lord, and I will continue to bring before the Lord, saying, I need to cleanse this. I need to only pull my self-worth from you. It's not something, because I'm the kind of guy that will burn the candle at both ends and in the middle, and I'll pour myself in, because at the end of the day, I love the gold star. I love the compliment. I love the person that says good job, because it does something. It strokes the ego. It makes me feel important. And the Lord's saying that should come from me only, not from anybody else. We have to offer ourselves to the Lord to be cleansed. We cleanse ourselves. We don't do it, but we bring ourselves before the Lord, and he may bring a messenger and a means to display a motive in you. And when he uncovers that and lays that bare in you, come to him for cleansing. And here's the thing. You have done it long enough from the well of your own willpower. It is time to quit washing in that well, and it is time to come to the well that only Christ can provide. Listen up.